Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. I want to talk about Mr. Charlie, Apostle to White America. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to refer to him as Mr. Charlie, but he has emerged as the apostle to white America. And this is what I mean. He is one of the strongest voices of the ultra-white conservative movement. Now, when we translate that, in other words, he is in defense of all that is white. White America, white Christian nationalism, white Jesus. And I want to break down a clip, an event that he was at about a year ago. And in this clip, he takes aim at the 1619 Project by Hannah Nicole, the lead writer in this series of essays. We'll get to that later. But it was the way that he did this, the mean-spirited, the insults, the outright lies that he tells at this event. And that's what I want to unpack, because what is most disappointing is that he did this at a Christian church, which I'll get to in a moment. Charlie Kirk, as I said, is all over the place. He is the executive director of Turning Point USA. He's the regular on Fox News. He's appeared at the Republican National Convention. He's been on all kinds of conservative platforms, PragerU and the likes. No surprise there. But Mr. Charlie, the way that he presents himself, the way that he presents his argument, as I said, outright lies. What is most disappointing to me was that this clip that we're going to unpack and break down happened at this man's church, Jack Hibbs. Jack Hibbs is senior pastor of Calvary Chapel of Chino Hills, that's California, a suburb of Los Angeles. And I'm very familiar with the Calvary Chapel movement, started by the late Chuck Smith in the 60s. Chuck Smith was known for his verse-by-verse teaching through the entire Bible. This led to the birth, not the birth, but certainly he was instrumental in what was known as the Jesus movement. What we know about contemporary gospel music came out of this Calvary Chapel movement. Also, and this is where it gets interesting, Calvary Chapel at the time of Costa Mesa, another suburb of California. Actually, it is in Orange County. That's important to note. But in the 60s, Calvary Chapel, Chuck Smith opened his doors to anyone, and he just taught, again, verse by verse through the scriptures. Some of the people that he talked to, many of the people that he taught were hippies, the throwaways of society. They would show up and, no shirts, jeans, long hair, and he just sat and taught them the Bible. And over time, many of them, having learned the Bible sitting under Chuck Smith, would mature in their faith, and then they would go back and start Calvary Chapel churches in their neighborhoods, in their hometowns, in their communities. Eventually, the Calvary Chapel movement, and into its present day, have some 1,400 fellowship or affiliates. Now, each Calvary Chapel is autonomous, but they do carry the name Calvary Chapel. And that's why you see here, even in the bio here, where he says, Pastor Jack, in the second paragraph, is well known for his passionate verse-by-verse expositional Bible teaching. Now, that's really kind of different than what Chuck Smith was doing. What it simply means is that they take a subject and then he will go verse by verse. Chuck Smith went verse by verse through the Bible. Now, The only reason why I'm making this comparison here is because the style is different. Another problem with the Calvary Chapel movement was that out of these 1,400 plus affiliate, and that also includes go under the name of Harvest churches, which one of its most prominent Calvary Chapel pastors is Greg Laurie. Okay, but one of the problems that you see with the Calvary Chapels is that out of the vast majority of these 1,400 fellowships are in predominantly white cities, white towns, upper middle class to upper middle class. In other words, there is a distinct pattern that when a person said, I'm going to start a Calvary Chapel church, they particularly look for white areas. And I asked Chuck Smith once on his radio program about this, to which he did not have an answer. He just didn't know. Now, Chuck Smith himself, in my opinion, is not a racist, was not a racist. But it is interesting that many of the Calvary Chapel, even those that could be in neighborhoods that changed over, they still kind of remain predominantly white in terms of their membership. And one of the reasons is because of this kind of mentality that many evangelicals have. And this is what I'm going to say here, and this is where Charlie Kirk's going to come in at. Many evangelicals have not so much as the biblical Jesus and the biblical kingdom of God, but a white Jesus with a white Christian nation. And people like Charlie Kirk nourish that. Now, Charlie Kirk, or Mr. Charlie, as I'm going to refer to him, as I said, is the apostle to white America. Now, Donald Trump is the savior, or the okay, and that's why many Christians, to their shame, even today, after so much uncovering of his character, even if you want to even accuse him of being criminal, just downright criminal, evangelicals, white evangelicals, remain true and faithful to Donald Trump. And Mr. Charlie is one of their chief apostles. Okay? And that's the sad truth here. Now, as I said, I want to unpack a video. I'm going to play the video, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to play this in entirety, and then I'm going to come back and then unpack it piece by piece. So here we go.
She is on a pathological campaign to make sure your kids hate America. And so Nicole Hannah Jones, red hair, see her on TV, always talking about how awful white people are and how awful our country is. She's a bitter racist. I actually call her racist because I think racism is hatred of anyone of any skin color at any time. I think it is sinful and hateful and awful, and it is a sin. That's simple. Okay. Yeah. So she says that our country was founded in 1619, the first year that slaves came to our country. This is not correct. It's not. So if you actually look at the founding of our country, 1776, this great leap forward, 2,000 years forward, derived, of course, from the teachings of Athens and the combination of Jerusalem, Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, Aquinas, Locke, all the best practices put into one, authored by who? Thomas Jefferson, very important, I'll get back to him in a second, who says, laws of nature and nature's God. What happens in 1777? First state ever to abolish slavery, Vermont, says that's it, we're done. Why? We're inspired by this document. They abolished slavery. We were inspired on the abolition of slavery. When they were putting together the Constitution, it was never a conversation, ever. Don't let the people, the New York Times or Nicole Hannah Jones tell you any different. That's right. It was never a question of whether or not we would have slavery. It was how we were going to get rid of this sinful practice. It was around for thousands of years. It was around before Christ. It was around after Christ. It is a sin. So our country was founded. Constitutional Convention, 1787. In 1787, George Washington says no new slaves at all, no slavery in the Northwest Territories. So anything forward, no slavery at all. They won't teach your kids that. Then, moving forward, in the Constitution, you can read it yourself, 20-year moratorium on the slave trade. You got 20 years, southern states, then it is coming to an end. Reappears Thomas Jefferson, who actually introduced a bill in the early 1790s in the Virginia House of Commons who said that slavery was an awful practice. I want to get rid of it. Now, mind you, it was probably one of the most perplexing pieces of hypocrisy in history because he himself was a slave owner, but he still was arguing for a moral good societally, failed in the Virginia House eventually. Eventually, of course, it succeeded. We saw in the 1790s, almost every single northern state abolished slavery. By the time 1807 happened, Thomas Jefferson had his time to shine. Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States of our country. That 20 years, tick, 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 in the Constitution, right? They did that as a bargain with the southern states. Thomas Jefferson, on the first day he was legally able to abolish the incoming of any new slaves into the United States of America 20 years into our founding. That is something we should be proud of. We were founded from the moment that we started that said that this was wrong and this is evil. Now, mind you, it wasn't a perfect history. It went through decades of ups and downs, and we went through a bloody civil war. But show me another country that sacrificed so much, brother against brother and father against son, to accomplish something that what? The churches were screaming in the pews and the pulpits, and Thaddeus Stevens was inspired by a pastor to go to Congress and say, slavery is anti-American. Our founders said it. Thaddeus Stevens said it. We fought this bitter civil war, and Abraham Lincoln kept the republic together on this unionist idea that I think America's best day can be ahead of us, where all men are equal and free. Fast forward all the way to Frederick Douglass, where he says that we need to abolish slavery. Why? Because I'm so inspired by the Declaration of Independence. He was an abolitionist who understood it. Go all the way fast forward to the great Martin Luther King Jr., who himself lived a very, let's say, he had questionable moral decisions, but he was arguing for what? A moral good. Why do I keep on saying this? Because people can act sinfully personally, but argue for something righteously publicly, and they should be remembered for what they did good publicly, not for what they did less than desirably privately. It's a very important thing. People say, well, we got to get rid of all these people, but dare you forget what they sacrificed for our country? And Martin Luther King said in that beautiful speech, I come here to cash in the check of the promissory note of the Declaration of Independence. Yes. He didn't say that this document was racist. He didn't say we got to shred it from its roots. He says this document says all men are created equal, and I'm telling you, Congress, to pass the Civil Rights Act. From that moment that we started this country to the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s, it was a constant theme, a march and a progression to be better. And isn't that what we do every single day in our own life, to try to be better today than we were yesterday? We cannot forget our history. We should be proud of it. No other country has pursued a moral good like the United States of America. Be proud of this country.
Okay, so let's break this down. First and foremost, what you saw was so many lies, insults, and again, this happened on a Christian platform, that this man who paid Mr. Charlie, allowed that because he aligned with the mentality. And what is disturbing about this is the same method that you have to stop and think about slavery. Now, think about what he just said, okay? The event that pretty much he just kind of talked about the slavery part for just that little clip right there. But I want you to understand, one, this is in a Christian church who's supposed to be bearers of the truth. I want to break it down that everything that he accused everyone else of, that's exactly what he did. Now, Mr. Charlie grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago, where, now understand, Mr. Charlie is very young. Okay, now, just in his late 20s. Now, why is that important? Because for all of when people say that racism doesn't exist, here you have Mr. Charlie's generation, how he is expressing some of the most hateful distortions of history. Understand, and I'm going to jump ahead just a little, but understand that this glorification of America, in order to do that, you have to distort facts and truth. Now you go, and I want to break it down, but I want you to see what he is doing. So the first thing you have to do, and this is the method that they did in 1619, from 1619 to 1776, from 1776 to 1865. I'm sorry, from 1776, yes, to 1865, and then from 1865 to 1965. The methodology hasn't changed. So in order to glorify, in order to overcome the cognitive dissonance of how bad we are, you have to say, well, we're not as bad as the other people. And this is some of the arguments you will hear from that, right? You're going to notice that Mr. Charlie doesn't talk about how, and notice it, he doesn't really talk about the white people's sin. Now, why is that important? Because everything he's talking about, he's going to talk about how bad black people are. He's going to talk about how bad the African slaves were, but he didn't talk about how bad the white people are. And you see this same mentality today. How bad is white people, right? Well, his argument is that they're not that bad. Yeah, we have some ups and downs. Yeah, we had our little shortcomings, but we're not bad. But what does it take for any nation to enslave people? Now add to that, what does it take for a nation that claims to be God-fearing? For a nation that claims to be a nation of freedom, that says that we believe that all men are created equal, right? And empowered, endowed with inalienable rights from the Creator, right? Paraphrase of that, but what does it take to be able to proclaim that, but then enslave a portion of its citizens? And this is what Mr. Charlie, his mission in life, is to get you to deflect from that. See, to get you to deflect from that. And again, I am most disappointed that this was allowed and aligned by a Calvary Chapel pastor on top of all of that, who's supposed to, he knows the Bible, and that's what makes it so damning. But let's break down. Let's go to clip number 1 and break it down. Here we go.
State-run religion. The founders didn't want that, but they still wanted the moral order. And that's why in our birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence says the laws of nature and nature's God, very explicitly, where it said, you know what, King George, this whole tyranny and autocracy thing, not so fast, my friend. We have a better idea from ideas that are derived from the law of Abraham and Moses and the tradition of the Bible that was fulfilled by the covenant of Jesus Christ. We're going to try out freedom of speech, protect our family, rights to privacy, states' rights, and guess what? If we get something wrong, we can course correct it because we don't have to worry about your tyranny, one-size-fits-all centralized control. We have a republic if we can keep it. Let's see what happens. This was the biggest risk in human history.
That's right.
I want you to understand.
Okay, so let's look at some of the first lies Mr. Charlie is telling. Well, first he talks about the approach. Now, what he doesn't talk about, again, is the sort of cognitive dissonance. Now let me also say this, that Mr. Charlie is not telling outright lies or full-fledged lies, okay? So a lot of the stuff that he is saying, and this is the interesting thing here, so a lot of the stuff that he's saying are half-truths, or they are truths that doesn't apply to him, but he's using them. Now, let me give you an example. The 3/5 compromise, okay, and it was a compromise. The southern states who owned slaves tried to count their property, their slaves, as persons, okay? Now, why is that? More people, more representation, more power in Washington, D.C. The northern states said, not so fast, southern states. How can you count, now they're white, how can you count your property as slaves when you don't consider them people? So the back and forth was, they ended up with the 3/5 of a human, that a slave was 3/5 of a human. Not that they believed that the slave was a full human, or even 3/5 of a human, because they still maintained that they were property. But the compromise, and this is what you will see repeatedly by the North, even by President Lincoln in the freeing of the slaves, so forth and so on, is that they were able to count their slaves as 3/5. Now you stop and think about it, that's better than nothing, because think about it, they really shouldn't have been allowed to count any slaves as a human, and thus representation in Washington, D.C. See the twisting of that, and this is my point right here. Now you're going to see that Mr. Charlie twists and apply things that, guess what, they don't apply to him. Like all of those who fought to end slavery doesn't apply to Mr. Charlie. If Mr. Charlie lived back in slavery times, do you think Mr. Charlie would have fought to end the slaves? Do you think Mr. Charlie would have had passion on the dark-skinned people? The reason why I say no is because of the immense effort and energy that he spends to try to defend that awful time. Okay? So some of the half-truths is that when he talks about, and he says this, but notice how he glosses over it, that the founding fathers at the time, in their retort against England, said, we don't want to be under tyranny, we don't want to be under your slavery, yet at the same time enslaved people. Okay? So his basics anatomy of America is a little distorted here, right? And again, this is the same kind of mentality that you see that people have. You'll notice he said he uses the term states' rights. That's a Southern term. That's what you saw. That's what the war was fought over. That's what the Confederacy held on to. They said states' rights. We saw states' rights in the Jim Crow era under the civil rights struggle. States' rights. So see, even in this, you see this ideal, this racism that's kind of peppered in that people don't realize. He talks about the natural laws. He talks about the how America was founded on Christian principles. The reality is, no, it's not, and they're not practicing it. And that is the interesting thing there. That's what you have to understand. They're not practicing the principles in which they claim to have. All right, let's go to clip number 2.
And the arsonists that try to say this bitter lie, they say, well, America was founded on slavery. And if I may, Jack, go into this.
You're quoting now, who is that?
Nicole Hannah Jones.
Yes.
She has a very perplexing
I just want to make
aesthetic.
sure we give credit. Where
She has red hair. I just don't quite. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No.
I mean, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that, but I want you to notice he's now going to take aim at Hannah. Now, this event happened about a year ago, which I think the 1619 project came out around. Actually, it did came out around 1619. I'll get to that later. And white evangelicals, white conservatives went nuts over this. Okay, but I want you to notice this on this Christian platform in front of this Calvary Chapel verse by verse pastor, how Hannah, he insults, he talks about her looks. Now, this is one of the things that slavery, remember how you were able to condition the minds of white America that slavery was okay, how that we can overcome our cognitive dissonance. We know slavery is wrong, but why is it okay to accept slavery? Well, because they don't look like us. First of all, they're not intelligent, they're not fully human. things we still wrestle with today, Mr. Charlie just proved that. His insult that she had a perplexing, right? A perplexing aesthetics. Aesthetics is looks. That's what simply it is. That's a sly way of saying she's ugly. She looks like an ape. That's what they used to say. Mr. Charlie would have said that back then. All right, let's take another look at clip 2 again.
And the arsonists that try to say this bitter lie. They say, well, America was founded on slavery. And if I may, Jack, go into this.
You're quoting now, who is that?
Nicole Hannah Jones.
Yes.
She has a very perplexing
I just want to make
aesthetic.
sure we give credit.
She has red hair. I just don't quite. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No.
So this is the person he is making fun of, her looks, right? Black people, they look like apes, right? She has a very perplexing aesthetics, and that pastor allows it. Okay? That's who he's making fun of, though. This woman. Now, we'll come back to her, and we're going to talk a little bit about we're going to talk about the 1619 Project in a moment. But let's go to clip 3.
I give credit where credit is due. When complete rubbish gets spewed from the paper of record, I want to make sure I get it right, unlike them, because they don't get it right. So Nicole Hannah Jones, she is on a pathological campaign to make sure your kids hate America. And so Nicole Hannah Jones, red hair, see her on TV, always talking about how awful white people are and how awful our country is. She's a bitter racist. I actually call her racist because I think racism is hatred of anyone of any skin color at any time. I think it is sinful and hateful and awful, and it is a sin.
All right, I wanted to come back to this here. Now, notice he says a couple of things. This is what he accused of. First, he talks about how she looks. She's ugly, right? Black people are ugly, right? Mr. Charlie, even though Mr. Charlie probably would have slept with her. I digress. But notice some of the things he said. Here's the lie. After he insults her intelligence, after he insults the way she looks, he says that she is teaching your children how to hate America. Right? And then she says how awful white people are. This is the tactic. Now, on Facebook, I get attacked the same way. There's a guy on Facebook who says that I am the most racist person he has ever met. Right? The most racist. Now get this. I am the most racist. Now, although he's never met me, other than Facebook. But he says, I'm the most racist person he's ever met. Now, why does he say that? Because of me talking about things like this. But racists like this, it's interesting, because this white man that called me the most racist, he's in his 80s. Charlie, Mr. Charlie, right, is just in his late 20s. See, not much of a, see the generation right there difference? But the mindset is the same. The mindset is the same. This, when he says that she says that all white people, he cannot produce one statement anywhere that Hannah Nicole has said that all white people are racist, or all white people are awful, or hey, people hate America. He cannot cite one. But what he does is by saying the mere mention that racism is evil. And why do you have to attack it that way? Because, well, who were the ones who had slaves? In America, who had slaves? In America, who drove racism? Who passed laws? Jim Crow laws. And so now the apostle to white America, the defender of all whiteness, has to say, well, anyone who talks about that, they're bad, they're evil. And he did it on a Christian church platform. He did it in front of Christians. So guess what now? He's still conditioning, using the same racist mentality to condition Christians to think this way. Oh, we get to Christians later, right? Because just so we won't forget, the Southern Baptist was founded in support of slavery. But that's another lesson. All right, guys, I'm going to pick this up in part 2. And we're going to continue breaking down Mr. Charlie the Apostle to White America. Don't forget to like and share this video. And if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. And remember, all comments are welcome. Till next time, see you then.